question is, how long will these impacts last? So far, NATO countries have done a lot to support Ukraine, and JEF countries in particular stand out here. Together, all the JEF countries spend more than all the other European members of NATO. The remaining 18 then, and the 10, we spend more. But Russia also receives help from its allies, namely China, Iran, and North Korea. And most importantly, North Korea is supporting the war by sending troops to Ukraine. But the war is larger than just what happens in Ukraine. We've seen an increase in hybrid attacks in the Baltic Sea region in particular. We've all read about the cables that keep being broken. But also we've received migrants on our borders and so on. The NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has said that Russia might test NATO in 4 to 5 years, but some, in particular in Estonia, argue that it might be even sooner. So, Prime Minister Starmer, what is the security situation in Europe, and what more can we do to be better prepared for all sorts of eventualities?
Well, thank you. And can I just say thank you to Estonia, the Prime Minister of Estonia, for setting up this event for us this evening. I don't think we've had one of these at a JEF event before, so it's really good to have the opportunity to discuss these issues in public. This is my 5th time in Estonia, so I'm beginning to understand and really appreciate everything that we have here. I came twice when I was a chief prosecutor working on criminal justice issues, and I came twice as leader of the opposition back in the UK to visit our troops in Tallinn. And now this is my first trip as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So it's really good to be here again with such a fantastic panel, if I may say so. On this question of security in Europe, the starting point for me is that I think we live in an ever more volatile world. I don't think many of us can remember a period quite as volatile as this, with conflict going on in various different seats across the world. And I have to say, when the Berlin Wall came down, I remember that profoundly as a young man. And I didn't think that we would see Russian tanks rolling across a border in Europe again in my lifetime. I thought that we'd turned a much bigger corner in the world than we evidently had. But here we are in a very difficult situation. We're now past the 1000th day of the conflict in Ukraine, and it's at a very pivotal moment, and therefore this is a good discussion to be having right now. The first thing I should say, because people often ask, well, surely the conflict should end? And my first answer to that is yes, of course. And the quickest and easiest way for it to end is for the aggressor to pull back, Russia to pull back. And we must always start in that place when we're talking about the resolution or what might happen next in Ukraine, because we have an aggressor and we have Ukraine that's been fighting for sovereignty and their way of life for a very, very long time now in this conflict. Clearly, as we go into 2025, there's a live debate now about what happens next. Russia has obviously got the capability to backfill its military capability in the offensive. It has little regard to life on its own side. Hundreds of thousands dead and injured on the Russian side, without regard really from Russia to the cost, the human cost to its own country of that. But nonetheless, a series of strategic errors, because if this was intended in some way to send a signal to or to weaken NATO, it's had the complete opposite effect. We have 2 extra members. We have a stronger NATO. We had the NATO summit in Washington in September of last year, and the unanimous view was that NATO is stronger now than it's been for a number of years, and as important now as it was when it was first founded many decades ago. So strategically, Russia's made some big mistakes in this war. As to what happens next, there's a lot of discussion as to whether or not there may or may not be negotiations. And none of us quite know the answer to that question. But what I think is really important is that we double down and remain steadfast in our support for Ukraine. Because whether there's negotiations or not, it is extremely important that Ukraine is put in the strongest possible position. And to be put in the strongest possible position, that means we, allies, have to stay united in our support for Ukraine, notwithstanding that it's been going on for some time now. United and giving more by way of support, whether that's more capability, whether that's doubling down on the funding that has been provided, and at the same time more effective and stringent sanctions on Russia, which is having an effect on their economy, and ensuring that we put in some of the backup with training, etc., which, along with our allied countries, we've been providing in relation to Ukraine. So we have to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position, whether or not there are negotiations. And if we get to the point of negotiations, it is really important that this is done with Ukraine, with an outcome that Ukraine supports. And so that's where we have to start our analysis of any negotiations. But there's a long way to go. There's a lot of discussions going on. There will be discussions in the next 24 hours here in Tallinn. Welcome discussions, as various leaders are here for the JEF meeting. But it is very important that we double down, we don't back down on support for Ukraine, because it matters not just to Ukrainian sovereignty, it matters to the whole of Europe, it matters to our values. And I often pose the question back in the United Kingdom when we have a discussion about this. Just imagine what the situation would be if Russia succeeded in this, and how that would impact not just our freedoms and our values, but our prosperity. So from a European point of view, it is really important that we see this not just as a Ukrainian sovereignty issue, which it certainly is, but as a much wider conflict where we cannot allow Russia to gain from the aggression that we've seen during the course of this conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And to follow up, what specifically could we collectively do to support Ukraine so it would be in a strong position? Is there anything we haven't done so far that we could do more of, or what is there left to do?
Well, I think there are a number of things. There is an ever-increasing demand for more capability. That is understandable. And Ukraine needs all the capability that it can get. So I think all of us are putting more capability into Ukraine by way of equipment and other support. A lot of money has been raised, funding has been raised, but more is going to be needed. We don't know what's going to happen in 2025, but more funding is absolutely needed. I think we have to double down on the sanctions, even more effective sanctions, because those sanctions are hurting the Russian economy, but we've got to make sure they hurt the Russian economy even more. So I think there's more collective work that we can do there. And the training is really important, the training of Ukrainian troops, which has been going on for some time now. I've been to see it for myself. I think some of my colleagues have. It's really good training. It's desperately needed. So I think on all of those fronts, we need to double down, but we need to be very public about this as well, because you know, there's a tendency when people think there may be negotiations to just assume that's the next thing to happen, and we don't need to concern ourselves with what's going to happen between now and the opening of any negotiations. I think that's a big strategic error. And therefore, I do think it's important that we speak with one voice, supporting Ukraine, doubling down, and demonstrating that with our actions. And we'll obviously be discussing this tomorrow morning at the session, leader session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the UK. You've been a stalwart supporter of Ukraine, and I think have been the beacon in European theatre as well in support to Ukraine. But Prime Minister Sture, what is your assessment of the security situation in Europe, and how can we make ourselves more secure?
Well, first of all, I agree with the outline that Prime Minister Starmer is making here. Of course, for any generation, having this open, biggest war in Europe since World War II is dramatic. We cannot spend one day without reminding ourselves that this is just extraordinary, you know, and the human cost, and it's going to be with us for so many generations. But let us also, you know, when we look at it from this angle, say that NATO is stronger. The alliance, the security of the 31 members is more solid. There has been a unique solidarity. You know, we've had Estonia coming in as an ally. It means that we are in this alliance together with the mutual security guarantees that provides. We have forward presence. There are British troops in Estonia, Norwegian troops with others in Lithuania. We have new regional plans for NATO. So it's been, I think, a much stronger alliance as I've seen during my 20 years in politics now. And that is good. So there is a net contribution to our security, which is there. And I think NATO still holds this position that, you know, we have to maintain that position that even considering inflicting damage on any member will unleash the total alliance. Then the second part is that we have to understand the ongoing threats. We come back to Ukraine, because there I agree with what Prime Minister Starmer said. Keep our support. We are also scaling up. We will be providing support of €3 billion next year. And it's correct, the Nordic and the Baltics are the lead donors after the United States, and we have to be there in quality and in quantity. But then I also think there are some other areas we have to watch. One is the hybrid threat, which is kind of this borderline threat. You know, when is a country attacked? It's not necessarily when the tanks is rolling over your border and it's deliberately something happening. But when are you in a situation where you're saying that you are now really, your sovereignty is being threatened? We need to work together on that, you know, on assessment of hybrid threats, on attribution of hybrid threats, be they attack of subsea infrastructure, be they in terms of, you know, hitting information systems in hospitals or public services around. We have to work more on that. And I mean, here, Estonia, I think is a very important country with your skills in these information technology areas, which we have to work on. Another example which we are dealing with now is the shadow fleet. These ships transporting Russian energy without any signs, without any insurance. This is bad for many reasons. One is that it is really going around the sanctions, which I think Europe has to understand that Russian energy is now on the increase again in Europe. Secondly, it's dangerous because these ships are old and they are not solid and they are not insured. So this is something we cannot simply watch, and now we are trying to come together. We will discuss it here at JEF, but we do it in other contexts as well. So my point here is that Ukraine is a catastrophe for the Ukrainian people. It is rocking stability and security in Europe, and we have to, you know, be vigilant on this. We are waiting for a new American administration coming in, but it does not mean that we in Europe should just sit and wait. I think we also have to reflect on how we position ourselves, how we coordinate better. Because this is my last point. After 1,000 days, many had predicted that there would be a lot of divisions. And I mean, among democracies and inside democracies, there are discussions. But I think what is remarkable is how united we have been. And that is something we really have to stick to. But we have to take that unity and make it concrete. Because now we meet, I think this is the third time I meet with my Nordic colleagues in 2 months. And we should see to it that the agendas we fix for each meeting builds on the previous meeting. So we are getting concrete. On how we improve on the shadow fleet, how we improve on coordination of our aid to Ukraine. I mean, the Ukrainians are asking for more air defense. There is more air defense potential